We as Californians are on the front end, on the front lines of some of the most severe, climate impacts today.
One of the biggest challenges in battling climate change is that usually those of us who live in Western countries are on the one hand those who have the biggest CO2 emissions and the biggest effect in pollution, but also live the furthest away of the effects that climate change has on human life on this globe. So usually literally 1,000 kilometers away, which makes it quite difficult to advocate for a change in our behavior, a change in policies, if the constituents literally can't feel the immediate effect in their everyday lives. That's not so much the case in California, though. For several years already, California takes the world headlines with dramatic forest fires that seem to get worse and worse from year to year. And maybe that is one of the many reasons that it is also at the forefront of making the energy transition happening. And in that regard, California can almost be seen as a model region for other Western countries. So what can we learn of the example that California is setting, and which of the steps that California has been putting into action in recent years are already having a positive effect? That's what we'll have a look into in today's episode. Welcome to the Smartery Podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. So our guest for today is Bernadette del Chiaro of CALSSA, California Solar and Storage Association, which she has helped build into the largest clean energy business group in California. And before she joined CALSSA, she's already been a leading voice in several solar power and clean energy-oriented initiatives and projects. I think it'd be totally fair to say that she really is a battle-hardened lobbyist for the good and clean cause of solar energy. Welcome, Bernadette. It's a real pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
The first question, I just want to give you the opportunity to simply brag about the work that has been done in California. So what has the US and specifically California done differently or even better than Europe?
Well, I think, first of all, let me just say we're all on this grand experiment, never been done before, transitioning a global fossil fuel-based economy over to 100% carbonless energy resources. So none of us are, I think, know exactly how we're going to get there. We're all learning from each other. I do think California has done a couple of things really quite well. One being just a very consistent commitment to clean energy for the past 20 years, and the very clear definition of renewable energy to really use our economy now, the fifth largest in the world, to drive new technologies to the fore. Solar, wind, as the two primary resources, but there are many others, fuel cells and geothermal power and of course energy storage now. That has happened because we've just been very, very clear about what renewable energy is. And we haven't let our definitions get muddied by, waste to energy power plants or nuclear power plants or other things that just really aren't environmentally friendly or truly renewable. So I think that's one thing California has done well. The United States as a whole is, of course, a patchwork quilt of policies, and we don't have a single federal policy that ties us all or creates a floor that, the states don't dip below. And so it really is hard to say the United States has done anything particularly well on clean energy because it is all being done at the state level. And of course, we're always competing in a healthy way with our neighbors in Europe in particular. And frankly, some places in China are out competing the rest of us with their investments in solar energy. And we should all be looking to each other to race to the top.
I think that's really interesting to hear, and I can totally relate to it, that it helps to be very, very committed and not change around either the commitment, but also the definition of clean energy from one government to the next every 4 years here in Germany, for example. So that seems to make totally sense. And I wish we could copy it, for example, here in Germany. I really love your comment about the US being a big patchwork, and I'll come to that in my next question. But before that, so that's what's been done really well in California. What on the other side would you say are the challenges that California still has to contend with? And what are the maybe also the whole country's biggest hurdles to overcome to complete the conversion to renewable energies?
Well, California is in an interesting place right now. We have 20 years or so of very consistent support for renewable energy, and we have some of the strongest markets for solar and wind power, and soon offshore wind. But we're nowhere near where we need to be. Of course, we have not. We're only about 30 to 40% of our grid is renewable, and very small percentage of our vehicles are electric, and of course our homes are mostly powered by fossil fuels. And so we have a long, long way to go. I think what the biggest challenge California has right now is just finally letting go of the legacy fossil fuel industries that are still really fighting to delay change. We have a vote, in fact, tomorrow at one of the state's highest agencies on energy, on electricity, and they are voting to approve the construction of natural gas power plants. I mean, it's just bizarre on one regard to think that California is going to, perpetuate its, commitment to fossil fuels in 2021. When we aren't really building as much renewable energy as we could. We're holding back on the development of renewable energy in many ways. And so, the biggest challenge is just time. We're a race against the clock on a planetary basis. We need to develop renewable energy as quickly as possible and transition off of fossil fuels. But the fossil fuel lobby knows that their future is limited, but they're going to fight tooth and nail and try to delay that transition for as long as possible. And that's really kind of defines the fight in California. It's not a question of if we'll transition to renewable energy, but when. And of course, climate science says we should transition now. And the fossil fuel lobby says, let's transition in 30 to 40 years.
And that's actually a fight that you've been in for, I think, more than 20 years already. So I used my own words when I said like a battle-hardened lobbyist, but I probably think it's really true. So maybe from your personal toolkit, what do you think the measures that have the most effect in that battle with, for example, the fossil fuel lobby? Is it behind the scenes negotiations? Is it public awareness campaigns? Is it trying to influence legislators? What do you think had the most effect in that forth and back with the fossil fuel lobby?
It's a great question. I mean, honestly, all of the above is really the honest answer, right? You need to pull all the different levers of government, and that is utilizing personal relationships behind the scenes, persuasion, fact-based arguments. But I would say that the single biggest tool that we have that's the most effective tool is public engagement. The public in California, and you mentioned this in your opening, and it is absolutely true, there is widespread understanding and awareness that climate change is real. It is happening now. And we as Californians are on the front end, on the front lines of some of the most severe, climate impacts today. And so there's really widespread across Republicans, Democrats, rural, urban, coastal, inland, you name it, the demographics, people across the board accept and want to see something happen to address climate change in California. But sometimes the disasters actually they're sort of a double-edged sword. They have the effect of kind of slowing people down and slowing change down, because they're so chaotic and they really kind of disrupt the normal function of government, such that they actually kind of have this effect of delaying progress on clean energy. It's somewhat ironic, but it's still kind of a real, it's just sort of a reality in California.
When I listen to you, it seems like within California, you have quite a luxury situation, whereas politicians from both sides of the table are in alignment, which is totally not the case if you look at the US as a whole, at least from a European perspective. You seem to have states like California, and on the other end, you have states like Texas. If you follow what's going on in the media, and specifically social media, it seems to be a very difficult and very extreme environment to navigate through. So on a national level, how do you navigate this and create a constructive dialogue around the topics that are important for you?
Yeah, and again, if you go down to say, Texas versus California are the two states that people like to kind of pit against each other. But if you go down to the state level, Texans love their renewable energy. They love solar power. They love wind. It's one of the largest, most robust markets for clean energy in the United States. Where things get a little twisted is more in Washington, D.C. and Congress, where the fossil fuel lobby just has just outsized power, and it's not necessarily reflective of where the public is at. So I think if you look at climate change, the polling would be different, right? Californians embrace climate change as a problem more so than Texans. But if you look at the solutions, renewable energy, solar power, there you're going to see everybody's head across America nodding yes. So it's not as controversial as it might seem. Climate change, of course, if you exist within that specific frame, is controversial still across the country, not so much in California, but across the country. Renewable energy, on the other hand, is not. So this is why I focus so much on promoting renewable energy, because it gets us to the same place. It gets us to solving climate change, and it gets us to yes across the board.
So you say that when you go down to a basic level, you ask people, they're really committed to renewable energies. That also seems to be happening specifically if you look at private companies, large corporations. Apple, for example, plans to build a battery-based renewable energy storage facility in California. And it's also making progress in its plans to become completely carbon neutral by 2030. We also heard, for example, Microsoft last year already committing to an absolutely ambitious energy or climate goal. They want to not only offset their current emissions, but all of the company's emissions dating back to their founding year, 1974. How important is the drive that seems to be happening on a corporate level?
This example of Apple and Microsoft and other companies all across America is hugely significant. Leadership really happens from the bottom up, whether we're talking a home going solar, a school district going solar, or a large company like Microsoft or Apple. Leadership happens at that local level. And one thing that is so important to remember when we talk about policy is what kinds of policies are we putting in place to both enable that level of grassroots, frankly, leadership. Even if it's a big company like Apple, it's still essentially grassroots if you think about it. They're an energy consumer. They're a giant energy consumer, but they're taking matters into their own hands to clean up their own business and their own activities. And that is something that policies like net energy metering, which is, of course, one of the most productive and powerful clean energy policies in California and throughout the United States, driving that type of investment. That's what those policies enable. And governments need to really prioritize and make certain that they are removing barriers to that level of leadership, local leadership, and encouraging it and incentivizing it. We're in the midst of a massive battle in California where the utilities are once again coming after the net metering policy and trying to essentially gut it to just preserve sort of their market, their monopoly over electricity and prevent consumers from generating their own clean power and setting their own clean energy goals. And so hopefully the California government won't let that happen. But it's a real battle right now that's happening, and it'll stifle that type of innovation, that type of ambitious commitment, and following up with commitment with real action, with the development of real renewable energy local to where it's being used and consumed.
There seems to be a lot of black and white. So you have really some pioneers coming from the US in regards to electromobility, such as Tesla. Large corporations such as Ford and GM also are announcing very ambitious goals in regards to sorting out the combustion vehicle and switching to electric. And then on the other hand, you talk about utility companies following their own agenda. How does it reflect also on an actual, everyday level? If I'm like a resident in California, how acceptant would I be of electric mobility? Could I charge my vehicle? Is there enough infrastructure? What's the picture there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, again, the story overall is one of the legacy industries, whether that's the utilities or the fossil fuel lobby in general, holding on to the past and trying to slow down and prevent progress against a backdrop of widespread acceptance and, in fact, kind of aggressive interest in investing in clean energy. On the e-mobility front, California is interesting. As a family, our family is only 2 electric cars, no fossil fuel combustion cars. We sort of went fossil fuel free about almost 10 years ago. And it's gotten significantly easier to get around that way. I mean, it's completely possible. We don't feel hindered in any way. We go up to the mountains. We go all over the place with our electric cars, because there is a pretty well built out, e-charging infrastructure around the state. But it's also spotty in terms of its acceptance. I would say living in a large city, San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles, you're going to have a plethora of charging infrastructure. But if you're out in some of the rural parts of the state, it's going to get a little dicey. You're going to have some range anxiety still, even in this day and age. So we still have a long way to go. We have a lot of problems with regards to renters being able to access charging infrastructure. We haven't really gotten there in terms of making electric cars universally accessible to everybody. So we still have a lot of work to go. But we've made a significant down payment, and it absolutely is possible, and I think increasingly accepted, though still ultimately considered a bit alternative. It's not yet the dominant way of driving in California.
What's the status quo in regards to regulation? For example, in Germany, I think also in Europe as a whole, there's an agreement to really phase out combustion engines by 2030 onwards, roughly. What's the current status quo in that regard in the US or in California in phasing out combustion engines?
Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order a little less than a year ago announcing plans to phase out the internal combustion engine in terms of new car sales by 2035. It's a goal. It's an executive order by the governor. So we'll see state regulations flow from that. It's not state law. So it has sort of different strengths to it. I think California will get there. Of course, GM has recently announced its plans to follow suit. And a lot of other car manufacturers, of course, many of which are European, are making the same sorts of promises and commitments. So we're sort of getting there, but it's not yet an absolute law with penalties in place if automakers and auto dealers don't comply. So we have a ways to go to get to that point. But I think the signal to the marketplace has been extremely, clear, and to have, again, kind of the largest car and automobile-oriented economy in the United States, to make that sort of a commitment at the highest level of government is hugely significant, and signals to the world, really, that California, kind of that almost invented, it feels like, the freeway and the personal car, addiction to the personal car. To have California signal that is obviously really significant. And we also have just recently renewed rebates for Californians to buy an electric car as opposed to a fossil fuel car. And that's interesting. There had been this movement in California for a couple of years to remove some of the incentives for electric vehicles, almost as if we had somehow already arrived at where we needed to get in terms of electric cars. And that seems to be shifting, which is a very good thing, with the government realizing that if it's going to get to this 2035 goal, it better start incentivizing consumers to make, electric vehicle decisions instead of buying that fossil fuel car.
In Germany, for example, they really incentivized hybrid cars. And there's a big incentive for companies to give their employees a hybrid car. And usually they get returned after 2 years with a freshly packed charging cable, because they also get a gas card. So they have absolutely no incentive to use the electric bit of their hybrid car. It would be really interesting to hear whether that's the case in California too.
No, we have stopped incentivizing hybrids because they're not really seen as they're no longer the bridge. They've sort of served their function, and we have moved now to all electric is what you need to get the incentives. So a lot of folks still think hybrids are great because they just have range anxiety, right? But from a government policy perspective, we recognize that all electric is really the place to put our focus.
I actually wanted to ask a question that goes away from the policy and regulations bit, but more towards the energy mix. I know that California is very sunny as a region, but I think despite that, California still plans to allocate 20 million of its current budget for the research and for feasibility studies around offshore wind developments. So why is wind energy so important to California?
California is very sunny. We need more energy storage if we're really going to make the sun work for us. But wind is an interesting and a very important addition to solar. Offshore wind, of course, has the promise of generating power more consistently than land-based wind. And land-based wind, of course, is an important addition because it generates power at night. So it's all part of a diverse mix. California needs to make sure that it is moving forward on all forms of clean energy if we're going to really, truly make our economy fossil fuel free. So offshore wind is an important, development that we have not yet really in the United States and certainly not in California tapped into. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take a long time to build. It's going to be expensive. We should get started now.
Yet on the other hand, on the positive side, that means you still have a lot of untapped potential that you'll be able to use, hopefully, very soon in the years to come. Well, thank you, Bernadette. Unfortunately, we're already out of time and have so many more detailed questions. But unfortunately, I have to wrap it up here already. Maybe just as a very quick bonus question, if I can still throw it in there, is, from a German perspective, it's like some ghosts of the past are suddenly coming up again. We've already phased out nuclear, we're phasing out nuclear, and suddenly you have people like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett announcing their very ambitious goals of establishing micro nuclear power plants. For example, they're planning a site in Wyoming with 345 megawatt. Is that suddenly a party you did not expect to join the table? And what do you think of that development?
Yeah. Warren Buffett has been invested in energy markets for quite some time. He was, of course, the mastermind behind a failed attempt in Nevada to eliminate the rooftop solar industry. So he's really invested in kind of legacy utility industries and large scale, old kind of, I'd say, legacy power resources like nuclear. So I'm not really surprised that he's behind kind of nuclear power dressed up in new clothes. I think mainstream America is ready to move beyond nuclear power. I think we've recognized that it is always extremely expensive. When you compare it to solar and wind, there's no contest. And then, of course, in California, we've already shut the door completely on nuclear power. There's a state law that prevents any power plant from being built. And that's in large part driven by earthquakes and just seismic concerns about that type of facility and the dangers inherent to it.
I think the single most important thing, what I took from our discussion, it was really the commitment, as you said, like the unwavering commitment to the energy transition, to a clean energy strategy, and not have it change it over the years. And as you said, also is while you're progressing and you're tapping into new technologies, not suddenly stopping to incentivize, modes of clean energy that you already have established, while still really taking all levels of society with you on that path. I hope that was a fair wrap up or conclusion.
That's a perfect wrap up. It's better than what I said, so I love it.
Thank you, Bernadette. It's been a real pleasure to have you as my guest.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure. Completely.
Stay tuned for more episodes of the Smarter E podcast.
Everything you need to know about the renewable energy developments around the world could be found at the Smarter E Restart 2021, taking place from October 6th to 8th in Munich. Information about the exhibition and the conference can be found online at thesmartere.de.